After Apple Picking by Robert Frost. First, let's look at the themes that you will be expected to pick out according to Sia. Sia claims that the themes you should notice in this work is poetic inspiration and rural life. The meaning of the poem could be applied to Frost and poetry, about an endeavour which the participant loves and enjoys but finds exhausting due to the loving effort required. Now let's look at a summary of what happened in the poem. After a long day's work, the speaker is tired of apple picking. He has felt drowsy and dreamy since the morning when he looked through a sheet of ice lifted from the surface of a water trough. Now he feels tired, feels sleepy, and wonders whether it is a normal end of the day sleep or something deeper. Now let's consider the context surrounding this poem. This poem is an allegorical poem which could describe his feelings about writing poetry. It was written when he was 39, which is relatively young. Yet regretful feelings seem like that of an old man. The poem was composed in 1913, immediately after his first book of poems, A Boy's Will, was published. After years of struggle, he finally gained favourable notice. This poem may be a response to that disappointment, an expression of his uncertainty about his future as a poet. He has had a productive life in writing poetry. His harvest has been a good one. He has been prolific. However, now he realises that the process has drained him. There is no regret, but also no desire to continue. He focuses on his failures, symbolised by the fallen apples, unfinished poems, unable to find the expression for certain ideas, etc. What should have been an entirely satisfying experience has left him dissatisfied. The harvest of apples represents the ambition of the artist to create. Having tried and not completely succeeded, what is there actually left to strive towards? The analogy of labour with the work of the imagination is continued as the poet describes the fruit that has to be harvested. Carefully. Poetic themes and metaphors that a poet must cherish in hand. The work, like apple picking, involves anxiety and loss. In this context, the reader can see the anxiety that must trouble the sleep of any artist, that his imagination must sometimes cease to bear fruit, perhaps forever. A kind of metaphorical death. Now let's look at the form and structure of the poem. This is one 42-line stanza, showing he is working in isolation. The unbroken stanza suggests the work is never-ending, continuous, suggested further by the enjambment as lines flow into one another. The varying line length shows the speaker drifting in and out of consciousness due to fatigue and the overwhelming smell of the apples. The shorter lines are more frequent towards the end of the poem, suggesting death is getting nearer. The irregular rhyme scheme shows how disorientated and exhausted he is. The slow pace throughout reflects his sleepiness or drowsiness of the speaker. Tenses often vary, revealing the confusion of the narrator. It is difficult to determine what is real and what is dreamed. The rhyme scheme is varied and inconsistent, reinforcing the inconsistency of his work, not picking apples, only filling half a barrel, etc. Also note the repetition. Sleep is repeated at least 6 times in the poem, and 3 times for fell or fall, and 6 times for either apples or apple picking. Let's look at imagery in general. Frost uses sensory imagery to show how his dreamlike drowsy state and reality fuse together. There is olfactory imagery, olfactory, meaning imagery of smell, shown through scent of apples. There is also oral imagery, aural, reinforcing the sound, the rumbling sound of load on load. There's also tactile or touch imagery, keeps the ache, feel the ladder sway, and visual imagery or sight through every flake of russet. Note the pane of glass. When the speaker looks through the ice at the countryside, he sees a distorted image. Everything looks frosty. Also note the metaphor of cider apple heap, for how society rejects old age because it's imperfect and unable to be as productive as young people. There is also the imagery of the ladder pointing towards heaven, suggesting the speaker embraces death, looking forward to rest. That is, if you interpret this poem to be about death, and there are many different interpretations. Not only should you watch this video and make notes, but you should also watch the other After Apple Picking analysis video on this channel. Let's analyse the title first of all. The poem is a depiction of the moment between being awake and falling asleep, as reflected in the title. The title is rooted in the everyday practicality of this man, yet is also concerned with what happens in his mind. It is reminiscent of the Garden of Eden. After picking apples, man is expelled into the world of sin and death, and condemned to suffer and endure hard labour. The poem is interestingly enough in first-person narration to reflect the conflicted feeling of the poet. Now let's look at a line-by-line analysis. My long two-pointed ladders sticking through a tree. Here, through the use of the personal and possessive pronoun my, we can see the first-person narration. Also note the contraction in ladders. Contractions are used throughout, emphasising the conversational tone and the everyday experience, and suggesting that there's quite a colloquial appeal to this poem. Then if we look at Toward Heaven Still, we can see the biblical imagery evoking the same idea as the title, and foreshadowing the allusions to death later in the poem. The speaker seems to embrace death and looks forward to rest. We can also see that he metaphorically suggests the aspirations and thoughts beyond that of a practical man. Then if we look at And There's a Barrel That I Didn't Fill, we can see here that his tone could be described as apathetic. There is a failure in completing his rural task. Could it be that he is reaching or striving towards perfection in rural work and his poetry? Or, if we take the idea of Eden, striving towards heaven to be free from work and labour? Then if we look at the fourth line, beside it, and there may be two or three, there is a lack of clarity reinforcing his apathy in the word may be. The repetition in apples I didn't pick upon some boy emphasises yet again his failures. Again, the use of the diction some creates a detachment from his surrounding scene, and the couplet boy and now reinforces the sense of finality. He is adamant that he will not complete this work. He is abandoning it. When we look at the line, but I am done with apple picking now, though, is it regret or relief? And there seems to be some sort of ambiguity here in what he feels. Essence of winter sleep is on the night. We can see clearly here the use of sibilants, creating a drowsy tone. The autumn or harvest season is representative of things fading. And we could see here that winter sleep could be a metaphor for death. Is the speaker perhaps saying that he wants to die? Then if we look at the scent of apples, I am drowsing off, we have further sibilants reinforcing the drowsy tone established earlier. The sense of smell dominates the poem and overpowers the speaker, adding to his sickened feeling of apple picking. I am drowsing off, and I cannot rub the strangeness from my sight emphasises that his sleep or fatigue is inescapable. If we also look at rub and sight, we can see more sensory imagery being used throughout this poem, and further use of sibilants in strangeness and sight. However, the sibilance is soporific, creating a dreary or weary tone. I got from looking through a pane of glass. Here we can see that this suggests how distorted his view is. He is viewing his natural world or trade differently now. The pane of glass is a metaphor for ice. I skimmed this morning from the drinking trough and held against the world of hoary grass. Here we can see that hoary has connotations of frosty. And again, held against the world, we can see he is viewing his world differently. It melted, and I let it fall and break. Again, I let it fall and break creates a sense of apathy. But I was well. Note the alliterative phrase, was well. Further through, upon my way. This generates a dreamlike atmosphere and emphasises the speaker's loss of control over the situation. Note the use of the word sleep that reinforces the drowsiness created. Then if we look at, and I could tell what form my dreaming was about to take, we can see that he is plagued with thoughts of not completing his harvest. There is further apathy through the ruined apples, through not choosing to go about his work differently, and completing his task. His work, we can see, is going to saturate his dreams, almost like déjà vu. Magnified apples appear and disappear. Here we can see he has a confused or mesmerised tone. He is starting to fade in and out of dreams and reality even more. There is a surreal or hallucinogenic effect of the smell of the apples coupled with the worker's fatigue, distorting images of his rural work. Stem end and blossom end, and every fleck of russet showing clear. My instep arch not only keeps the eck. Here we can see through every fleck of russet showing clear that he is being overwhelmed by a dreamlike kaleidoscope of colours and images, sounds and smells. There is almost a sensory overload that heightens his feelings of pain or fatigue. Note the alliterative phrase arch and eck in my instep not only keeps the eck. Here we can see that the laborious effect in this rural task is emphasised, and even though he's been off the ladder a while, it has left him with lasting pain in the arches of his feet, emphasising his exhaustion. This is furthered through the choice of diction, pressure. In it keeps the pressure of a ladder round. I feel the ladder sway. Here we can see the instability of the ladder reflecting the instability of the speaker, and the alliteration of bows bend further emphasises his pain and confusion. And I keep hearing from the cellar bin the rumbling sound of load on load. The onomatopoeia, rumbling, is ominous and unpleasant for the speaker, reminding him of his labour that seems to plague him. He keeps hearing it, almost as if it is haunting him. Then if we look at load on load of apples coming in, the repetition suggests the enormity of the task and the pressure he is under. He is feeling incredibly overwhelmed. For I have had too much. This line is full of monosyllabic words that emphasise his dreariness and lack of energy. We also see the alliterative have had, which reinforces his feeling of being overwhelmed. Of apple picking I am overtired, of the great harvest I myself desired. The rhyming couplet here initially shows us that he intended to complete the task, the past tense suggesting an earlier enthusiasm for it. But this takes place after the apple picking. We can also see the caesura of apple picking, I am overtired, heightening his exhaustion. There were 10,000 fruit to touch. Here we can see the hyperbole or repetition. The speaker had at one point been a perfectionist, yet has relinquished his pursuit of perfection and of apple picking, having been unable to achieve the ideal in life. He does not want to continue on. Cherish in hand, lift down, and not let fall. Here we can see that previously he took pride in his work, but striving to perfection is a demanding and burdensome task. He is unable to strive to perfection and reach the heaven he so desires. Also note the use of caesura and the slow pace emphasising how painstaking and tedious the work is that he is doing. The task is too difficult due to the precision and effort required in the handling of a single apple, of which there are many. For all. Note this line and how short it is. The shortened line emphasises his drowsiness. We can almost see him dropping off to sleep. That struck the earth. Note the violent verb that stresses their damage. The earth corrupts, taints, or ruins the apples, continuing the religious connotations of Eden and the fall of mankind, being removed from the purity of heaven. Went surely to the cider heap, as of no worth, further emphasises that they have been tainted. One can see what will trouble this sleep of mine, whatever sleep is. We can see now that he is concerned about the future. Were he not gone, the woodchuck could say whether it's like his. This hibernating animal could confirm the nature of the speaker's sleep. We can also see here the contemplative tone as he muses over what his future might be. Whether it's like his long sleep, as I describe its coming on, or just some human sleep. Long sleep could be a euphemism for hibernation or death, entirely removed from his present. The poem is at a metaphorical level. Life is the harvest, and winter sleep is death. Something from which he will arise refreshed and rejuvenated is the interpretation of just some human sleep. And note the repetition of sleep throughout the poem to emphasise just how physically exhausted, as well as mentally exhausted, the poet actually is. The majority of the poem is systematically and unsentimentally recording the physical and mental experience or the effect of the apple picking.